You're watching TVC Breakfast. Let's get to our next discussion now. Former President Olusegun Obasanjo is no stranger to controversy. In fact, one might not be wrong to say that the elder statesman courts controversy like a new bride. And just like Chinua Achebe's proverb of a man who fetches ant-infested firewood, lizards have come visiting. The former president has come under heavy criticism and tongue-lashing from Nigerians after he stated that he would have gotten a third-term presidency if he desired it. Mr. Obasanjo, who stated this during a virtual meeting organized by the Africa Leadership Group, denied claims that he ever pursued a third-term tenure as president of the country. He said, and I quote, "I never asked for a third term. If I wanted a third term, I would have gotten it. I am audacious enough to know how to get it." We have in the studio this morning political analyst Biodun Sowunmi to help us make sense of all of this and also make Nigerians understand what the issues are. It's nice to have you join me this morning.
I'm pleased to be here.
Great.
Good morning.
Right. As we get along, we'll also be having another guest join us on Zoom, but certainly we'll let you know when that happens. All right. 2006, precisely to 2007, I believe a lot of Nigerians wouldn't have forgotten how the news that made the rounds that time regarding the issue of constitutional amendment that had a third-term agenda and so many other things in there at that time. A lot of persons believed, made conclusions that the president at that time, President Olusegun Obasanjo at the time, had interests to amend the constitution and stay for another term after he had, his second term as provided by the constitution was completing at that time. But recently he said that no, he didn't. He wasn't part of it. That he didn't send any bill to the National Assembly. It was an assembly thing. Whatever they did was them as a third arm of government. You were present. You knew how everything played out at that time. Can you maybe refresh the minds of Nigerians?
Yeah, at that time, President Obasanjo was in power. He was a very powerful president. During his tenure, I think we had about 2 Senate presidents, and the parliament was very, very compliant to a large extent to the dictates of the presidency. And suddenly this bill came to the National Assembly to amend the constitution and allow for a third term. And in addition to that, there was also a sweetener that the governors would be allowed to go for a third term also in exchange for their support, for that very particular bill. There was a huge controversy in the country. Fingers were pointing to President Obasanjo that he wanted a third term. For some time, the then President Obasanjo denied it, but the rumor didn't go away until suddenly we saw allegation of 50 million naira being paid to each of the senators, and some of them brought it to the floor of the House, 1 or 2 of them to the floor of the House, and said, "Look, I have gotten my own money here, and this is about total." And for some reasons, there was also a very powerful inner caucus in the Senate who were hell-bent on truncating that. And I think Ojikalu recently provided more information on that, and they were able to stop that agenda. Even at international level, countries like Britain and US were seeking for clarification to know whether in reality there will be a third term in Nigeria. And I remember clearly that at that point in time, the Foreign Secretary of Britain actually warned that whatever we intend to do should be in conformity with the constitution of the country. So basically, that clearly established the fact that not only domestically, but internationally, there was a wide perception of a third-term agenda. And a bill was actually in the National Assembly. Now, what President Obasanjo is correctly saying is that it was not an executive bill, and it was a member's bill. That's the point he's saying. But we all know how these things work. You have a presidential liaison officer, in charge of National Assembly. You can always get anybody to do what you want them to do. So, but in terms of the truth, in what the former President Obasanjo said, that he didn't sponsor any bill. Yes, he did not actually sponsor a bill, but a bill was sponsored, which...
He actually sponsored it from the shadows. In fact, I have an anecdote, something that really happened. A legislature was asked to keep the 50 million for two other people, 50 million. So he kept it in his own bathroom. And somebody was visiting another politician. And they said, I want to go and use your bathroom. He said, no. You cannot go and use that bathroom because there is a bomb there. Then said, I want to go to that bathroom. I want to explode. That was how the thing was. In fact, there was a legislator that did not collect the 50 million. Absolutely. And the father told me, he said, I don't want to reveal the gender from the way he spoke. He said the child does not know anything about politics. He said, first you collect the money, and then you vote against it. But that's what the father told me. Of this legislator who was supposed to collect 15 million, who was out of principle not in the right mood to be bribed at that time. Now the question really is, why is he saying all this? In all he has said, he didn't condemn the idea of third term.
He actually said if he had wanted it, he
had the audacity to do it.
Yeah.
The point is that he had the audacity, but did not have the cunning and did not have the morality to achieve it. That was it. He failed. But what was more painful about it was that third term agenda was part of a bigger project of constitutional reform, which many thought was a great document other than the third term. But because the third term was spiked, he allowed the whole constitution, the whole document to go. Is that exact imperial presidency or presidential selfishness?
Well,
or egoism?
Well, it was sad because some of the problems we face today will have been resolved, by those amendments, by the constitutional amendments proposed. But with a poison chalice, that is, you go for a third term, all the governors will be given third term, including the president. And nobody wanted that. So the National Assembly was prepared to throw the whole thing away. There were actually senators that openly admitted, and some privately admitted, to collecting 50 million naira, to sweeten the passage. And eventually, quite a huge number of them decided against the third term because it will have created a major political problem in the country. Again, it means we're changing the constitution. When a new president gets there, he might as well change it to life president, and people were actually opposed to it. But in all this, President Obasanjo kept denying involvement, even though all fingers were pointing at the presidency clearly, both domestically and internationally. They were pointing to that direction, that look, this is where the money... Who else can afford the 50 million naira? At that time, that was a lot of money, per senator. Who would have gotten that money? Who? Even members of the House of Reps were given the largesse. So who would have gotten that kind of money at that point in time? And the money could only come from one source, which became later very clear. And we have had Ojikalu actually giving more exposition, revealing what actually transpired.
In his recent video that went viral.
Yeah. And we are yet to have any response to that. But again, interestingly, for me, the fact that President Obasanjo chose his Africa Leadership Series, to make that denial, while at the same time saying that he was audacious enough to do it, is very revealing. He still wants to be seen as an African leader.
We saw him recently in a video, 100 years of
Baptist,
Baptist boys.
Yes, BBHS.
Where
It
they were doing this, I was playing principal. So his own old boys and old students. He was playing principal. That's the kind of principal he was as a president. Was trying to be a principal of a democracy. It didn't work. He wanted to make himself principal of a third term, and it didn't work. And so that is the kind of person who says that he has to decide who Nigerians should vote for.
He also did a 26 kilometer trek.
Yes.
But that was also politically very revealing. You know, the journey to third term was a long one.
It was a long walk.
It was a long walk, which ended up in failure.
And Nigerians will not forgive him for creating a document as a charade for his own enthronement or re-enthronement. You know, that little thing, as you said, a little thing. There was Paul who said in Galatians, he said, a little leaven leavens the whole lump of bread. Just a little thing can just soil.
They could have solved many of the problems we faced. No, it's a matter of regret that we abandoned, you know, that the bill was thrown out, the constitutional amendment was thrown out, you know, because of the third term. Because a lot of many issues will have been resolved if not for the issue of third term inclusion in that constitution.
I remember writing a column I was in the US that time. I wrote a column when the crisis was going on. And I predicted, I said, by the time this thing fails, Obasanjo will come out and say, I had nothing to do with it. But it was quiet before then.
Yes.
Yes. He was waiting and scheming and trying to be cunning. And he lost.
You will never see Mr. President with the former president's finger in anything. And I always admire his courage. And when he denies things, he will make sure there's no audit trail directly linking him to issues.
But we have trails to build university. We have trails now to 100 million naira that which it amounts to billions of billions today that Atiku put in his fake vehicle. SPV.
That's marine float.
Marine float.
Yes.
It didn't really float.
But surprisingly, you know,
it has sunk.
I just couldn't believe, you know, how Atiku will reveal that information, forgetting the fact that he was also indicting himself. Not only indicting Obasanjo, but indicting himself.
He didn't know that the thing was coming to the public.
Yes.
It was a trusted
Achimgo, very trusted aide of Atiku.
And on the other hand, if all of that allegation, whatever we heard, whatever we saw is something to go by, the atmosphere was a kind of letting him know we can do these things. It was a way of priding the capacity, you know, the mindset and the cunningness to achieve some things. Is it not Nigeria that we can do some of these things, and it lets you know that I believe it's from that prism that kind of conversation came up.
Yeah, and there's also the aspect of you rub my back, I rub your back.
Yeah.
You are the president and the vice president. Give me 3 people to float a company for you, a special purpose vehicle, you know, to achieve some financial deals, you know, and you then begin to ask yourself that he's not just talking about Obasanjo. Atiku, who in fact are you? Given all what we know, what even Obasanjo wrote about Atiku, you know, to have that kind of evidence in public domain.
You're watching TVC Breakfast, and on this segment, we're looking and dissecting some of the issues that emanated. Nigerians are talking about former President Olusegun Obasanjo, who recently, addressing a group under the Africa Leadership Group, he was talking to people, and he went into some things that happened in his presidency when he said that he didn't make any move for third term. He wasn't even interested. But that if he wanted to, he would have gotten it. But Nigerians are saying, no, Mr. President, that wasn't what happened. Nigerians are reacting to that. And we have in the studio a political analyst. We are looking at these issues. We have Biodun Sowunmi with us here in the studio. Now, under President Olusegun Obasanjo, we had 5 Senate presidents. beginning from Evan Nwerem. We had Chubok Kadigbo. We had Adolphus Wabara. We have Anyim Pius Anyim, and then Ken Namani. You know, Ken Namani, who was Senate President at that time that we're talking about, the third term, wrote a book on this.
Yes.
Somebody like Professor Chidi Odinkalu wrote a book on this. Now, it draws our attention to the power of the president of Nigeria. In fact, some people have said that the Nigerian president is the most powerful president in the world, looking at the powers within his disposal or at his disposal. Now, a lot of Nigerians have advocated that those powers should be devolved into states and other institutions and all of that. But we have not seen that happen yet, as much as Nigerians know that the Nigerian president is so powerful.
Yes, the problem is quite very clear. You cannot have a unitary system, or you call it a federal system. We emerged from military rule. The constitution was midwifed by the military. Yes, to some extent amended. Now, but you have a situation where the presidency has been structured along the lines of a military head of state who has to be so powerful all in all. So, and Obasanjo happened to have inherited that, and it was a familiar territory for him, being a former head of state. And we've had that problem ongoing. So you then have situations where some civilian governors, started challenging, that structure. That look, you cannot have this kind of situation where the president decides everything in a federation. And I remembered Professor Yemi Osinbajo was the Attorney General in Lagos, challenging some of these issues, and they were successful in court. Even the issue of local government creation, the Supreme Court did not rule against Lagos State. It simply said it was incoherent until when the National Assembly actually, passed it into law. So we've always been having challenges, to all these excessive powers of the president. We still have those powers today, but this will be resolved at a point in time, when more responsibilities are devolved, either through restructuring or whatever you want to call it, to the federating units. You cannot have a superstructure, more powerful than the federating units. That's totally unacceptable. In the same way, you cannot have a third tier of government receiving federal allocation. It's an anomaly to have local governments in a federation. What you have is the two federating units, the superstructure, and the structure. The structures are the federating units, the states.
Well, Baba came from the old ideology of Babaism, which means that everybody must say yes to him. That, I am the Lord of the manor. That is one. So you have the factor of individual egoism. Two, is from a military background where a privileged chain of command, where everybody must come and bow to the man. And then we're also historically a monarchical society. And the Yoruba race is also essentially a monarchical,
yeah.
historical.
Yeah.
Now, all of these demons were brought together in one man. How would you not expect him to start to say, I am the Lord? Whatever I say is law. That is exactly the kind of psychology that we need to understand about a man called Obasanjo. He sees himself as an embodiment of lofty egoism, monarchical centralization, military hierarchy, and a sociology of subservience.
Yeah. I mean, that's quite, I think you've put it very hard. But you also have to consider the fact that he was a general. A general is always a general.
Yes.
And what they understand is ditch out orders, and others must comply by force, whether you like it or not. I mean, that's the nature of the military training. That's his own training. So, and his disposition. And we've seen that reflected in the way he governs, in the way he has related to other people.
Yeah, but we have seen too that in other societies, where you had generals become head of state. They have subjected themselves to the rule of law and to democracy. We had that with Eisenhower, we had that with De Gaulle, we had that with Churchill, we had that with a number of them who were generals who became subjected to the rule of law. But because Obasanjo sees democracy as his own democracy, he now turns democracy into his own autocracy.
There's something about his personal construct psychology, which is his own personal disposition to how he views issues. And President Obasanjo, rightly or wrongly, believes that he's the father of Nigeria. He's the savior.
I think the problem is that nobody has accepted him as father of Nigeria. So he has that father deprivation syndrome.
Correct.
He has been deprived of his fatherhood.
He's a very interesting man, elder to study.
Yes.
He's a very interesting Baba.
But such a toxic father.
You can study it from all sides.
From all sides.
From all sides. He has so many sides.
Yeah, even if you take his personal construct disposition to the issue of monarchical rule.
Yes.
It's a very interesting man.
Look what he did to the Owu throne. That's why I call him the Owu chief. Yes. What he did to Owu throne. He wanted to also become a monarch in absentia.
Baba still dictates largely what happens in Owu currently in terms of the throne.
Yeah.
He has established himself, in terms of when it comes to monarchy, he sees himself as a major player in that very aspect. And very few people would dare step on Baba's toes when it comes to the show.
I think it's the deduction of the fact that Africans, especially even if you narrow it down to the Yoruba culture, we submit to seniors who submit to rulership, elders exactly, and all of that. So
gerontocracy.
He's
an
elder, and no one is going to say, okay.
We call him Baba.
Exactly. He likes to be called Baba.
But
the irony too in Yoruba land is that the Yorubas, even when he was president, have not really accepted him as the leader of the Yoruba.
Oh yes.
And that is paining him. From the time of Awo, he fought Awo. He left Awo. He fought Abiola. He fought Abiola. Now he's fighting Tinubu.
Yes.
And all this while, he is seen as an old man who is not given the big chair in the house.
But Baba always have a safe abode. He will tell you, well, he's not a Yoruba leader. He's not coveting it. He's a national leader.
He was, but it's neither a father in the nation, nor is he. When Yaradua was there, he put him. Jonathan came back. He started writing letter. When Obasanjo started writing letter, I know that nobody is giving him audience in the house. He started writing letter. He put him. Jonathan came. Put him. Buhari came. No dice. So it feels like it's a father who is now in the doghouse.
Baba is a very interesting personality to study, and there are so many aspects of him which I think researchers need to go into and understand his personal construct psychology.
I think there's a delusion of grandeur that made him want to stay for third term, wanted to remain in power forever. Because he couldn't see himself as not being the man who can attack Odi, attack
Zaki.
He loved the idea of people loving it. There was one prominent monarch in the north who told me that one time one governor came to him. As he came to him, he had the record of the man and said, so you still have your two hands. So they've not cut it yet.
All right. Recently, the former President Olusegun Obasanjo endorsed Peter Obi, the candidate of the Labour Party, And he also, deductively, you could see that also in the letter that he wrote. However, he decided not to be part of the campaign train as a way of going around to the candidate that he is recommending for Nigerians to vote for, to hold his hand, to say, okay, this is him, let's move around the country to show. Do you see any kind of contradictions there?
Yes, the reactions when President Obasanjo endorsed Obi, the reactions were so negative, and so many people, it's like the knives were out for him by virtually everybody in the country. And it brought back memories of his leadership style when he was in office. And many people recalled so many things, and it became a deficit. One way or the other, the endorsement became a political deficit in a way that there was no point in moving around with him and going to the rally, raising his hands and all that. What would they gain from that? So I think Baba is smart enough to know that, look, this has not gone well, so the best thing is to reverse. So he engaged the reverse gear one way or the other. So that's where the contradiction lies. But that was forced into being by the reactions that greeted the endorsement of Obi by President Obasanjo.
Yes, that is also an act of cowardice, don't you think? You don't have the courage of your own decision.
But I will not say that. I will put it this way: a general runs away at times to live to fight another day.
Remember that he was accused of being a coward too during the Civil War. Well, correct. Somebody recorded that when he went to the battlefield, they shot him in the buttocks, and Obasanjo started running. It's on record. It's on record. He started running. What's his name? They called him Hitler. He's dead now. Who wrote? Is it Luyomade? Colonel Luyomade wrote about it. That when they were in the battlefield, they fired him in the buttocks and started running. And then when he was head of the 3rd Marine Commando, and when people like Akinrinade were buckling down on Biafra and forcing them to surrender and negotiating with
Benjamin Adekunle.
Benjamin Adekunle was already gone that time. Was already removed. He took over from Adekunle when he had already gone. And then it's recorded in Arabi Sama's book, A Tragedy of Victory, that Obasanjo was rambling around where there was no conflict around Biafra. Whereas where the conflict was, it was not there. And then when they finished the whole work, they have finished it, they called him, the soup done, make you come chop. Then he came then as the man to now collect the surrender from
I think it's Alexander Madiebo.
No, not Madiebo. It was I forgot his name now. It was not the one. He collected it.
Not Philip Effiong?
Effiong, yes. Exactly. I think Effiong was next in command to Ojukwu at the time, and all of that. Now, so with this now, with what played out in 2006, 2007, can one confidently say that as far as Nigeria is concerned, the issue of, even in the future, the issue of anyone coming to say, whoever president it comes to say that, okay, I want to elongate my stay, can Nigerians say we've kept that behind us now because of the complexity of what we are and who we are as a nation?
Oh, certainly. It's going to be very, very difficult for anybody to come up and say, look, I want to do a third term. That will not be possible any longer. We have a precedent. And Nigerians rose in unison and said, no, this will not happen. And no matter how compliant the National Assembly is, you would always find people who will stand up, very courageous enough to stand up to say, no, this will not happen under our watch. And that's exactly what happened in 2006, 2007. So I cannot imagine a repeat of that. Many politicians have learned from that experience. So we should expect a transition to happen.
He has cured us of that innocence.
Yes. Today we're still talking about it. It's a reminder, to those, to politicians or military politicians, that we have gone past that stage now. Nobody can come back with that agenda. It will be resisted.
Right. Now, the issue of books, let's talk about the issue of books, because books are meant to, you know, let everyone know in the future exactly what happened, how it happened. And of course, like he talked about the issue of the Civil War. So many persons had written about the Civil War from various perspectives. And Ojukwu had his own narration. Of course.
He didn't write it.
He had his own. He
was talking about the book. The book never came out.
Yeah, but that book, we're still expecting that book. Maybe it's somewhere. They're waiting for a certain time to be unveiled. Of course, Gowon had his own narration. Obasanjo had his own narration. Shehu Musa Yar'Adua had his own. A lot of Nigerians had their narration.
Alexander Madebo.
Exactly. They all had
Alabi Sama too wrote.
Exactly. And if you read all of those, even the one incident that happened, you read and hear different perspectives and angles to whatever happened. So the point there is, one would say, of course, as much as books put these things for people to understand, but we still need more of these issues. And it draws us back to the issue of the third term that we're talking about. Of course, we've seen the book by Ken Namani. We've seen the book by Professor Odekalo and all of that. Would you encourage people to keep writing? Like Audacious Okalo just came out and talked about, how they were part of those at that time who acted in one way or the other, who supported Nigerians to say, okay, let us stand against the third term. Issues of books. Talk to us from that window. How important
the books are very, very important. They are records of events, that will always inform future decisions and positions taken not only by people in government but also by the people. Because human memory is fallible. Over a period of time, people can forget. But when these things are documented, then the likelihood of that forgetting will not be there. Then again, there are also historical accounts of factual incidents. And then when they are documented, they can also be used either for academic purposes or for political purposes in any society. When you look at the issue of the third term agenda, we've had so many revelations coming out recently which were not documented. It's important. For instance, when you watch the video by Ojikalu, I think, he made so many startling revelations, and some of them challenged the perception out there in the public. So I think someone like Ojikalu can also write his own experience. It can only enrich debates in the country and also enrich our records rather than taken away from it. So the books are very important. There are still more people that need to contribute their quota. And I think some of them have been doing some work. Professor Sylvester Odion Akaine has done some paperwork on some of these issues and on third terms through his SENCOD. But all these things need to be put together and made more available in the public domain. Now, the physical library may not be there. Internet is the most important library nowadays. People can always, access those information. So it's important for people to write.
Yes, in the historical scholarship, we hear of a history. There's no such thing as the history. Because everything comes from a particular point of view. In the U.S., the Civil War is a cottage industry. Every year, there are always books on the American Civil War, over a century after the hostilities. Yes. History is about gathering materials and gathering perspectives. And what we need is rigor. What we need is the capacity to put all the facts in context. And sometimes a fact can come that can destroy a series of facts or illuminate a series of facts and change the perspective of a series of facts. And it is always, that's why they say history is, the past is not always the past, according to the novelist William Faulkner. The past is never past, it's always with us. In fact, there is an argument now in the US. There's a professor, head of historical society in the US, who recently talked about the idea of history being overtaken by the concept of presentism. In other words, we are always looking at the past through our present mirrors, that we are not paying attention to the rigors of what happened in the past. But, I also had to comment on it in the New York Times to say that, well, it is if the U.S. today is talking about racial inequality in their historical studies, and they are not going into too many things, it is because they have lied a lot about the histories of their past and made it too much white and taken the blacks and the minorities out of it. That's why people are arguing about it now. So they are trying to use the present to save themselves from the past.
Yes,
that's what it is.
You are quite. I align with your thoughts, because history is never closed.
Yes.
It's continuous.
Yes.
It's not only continuous, it's also dynamic, because it's subject to interpretations, it's subject to individual perceptions, and what you put down is exactly like Sam said. You can only have a history, you can't have the history. The moment you have used the history, then you are establishing it as fact, which may no longer be interrogated. And that is why historical accounts always differ from one person to the other. It depends on
one perspective to the other.
One perspective to the other.
View of the history is different from Alabi Sama's take on the history.
Absolutely.
Maybe the third term issue may not be too palatable to Obasanjo. That's why I remove history from the studies, so that nobody will know about the calamities that he imposed on his own people. That's why in his own time, he said, why should they put history in studies? Well, history is coming back gradually, because, as Shakespeare said, truth sunk into the earth shall come out again. And Apostle Paul said, we can do nothing against the truth, but for the truth.
You remember the argument made at that time about why are we studying courses that people will not get jobs over. And then people were looking at Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, history, and some other courses. But for some reason, it was only history that was taken out of circulation. And that has become a major problem for the country.
Lagos has started, Lagos now, as Lagos State government.
It's been ordered to be returned.
You cannot forget your history.
You cannot forget your history.
You cannot.
There was one time Obama was trying to make a statement. I was trying to talk down art history. When he was trying to make sure, evangelize the idea of focusing on science, technology, and so on. And he tried to talk down art history. And people rose up against it. Why do you play down art history? History of Leonardo da Vinci, the history of
Van Gogh,
all those people. You know what story they told about the culture, what philosophy they were bringing out for people to understand, how they reflected their times.
I remembered at the point...
He had to apologize.
Yes, I remembered when he was trying to attack art history. I think I was in Amsterdam, and I went to Van Gogh Museum. That's a museum dedicated to Van Gogh. And I learned quite a lot about what happened just through painting, through artworks. From that, learned a lot about things that I had little idea about. I was able to learn a lot from it. So I was not surprised when Obama was forced to retreat and
look at the issue of the Benin bronzes that are brought back. Those are
absolutely
exactly.
That
is huge history.
Fundamental interrogation into our past.
That's true. So the point is, we saw recently the President Buhari has been alongside other West African leaders, have been looking at putting a strategy to prevent situations where there are coups and then, the recurrence of coups and presidents staying longer in office. That has been an issue on the African continent. We have several African countries that still have their presidents for the past 30, 40 years, and it's still on. And the countries have not changed the way they wanted. So the point there is, how do we begin to weigh in ourselves? Because it has to do with the mind. How do we begin to weigh in ourselves where we get to the level when Africans are saying, you know what, as much as democracy, it should be the way we want it to be, but then the concept of having one man stay in power for the rest of his life may not necessarily be the kind of democracy that we are, looking forward to having. Even if we want to have our own kind of democracy that is not necessarily Western.
Homegrown democracy.
Homegrown kind of democracy.
Yeah.
So how do we win ourselves of that?
Yes. President Obasanjo, when he was in power, I think at a point in time with Mandela, they came up with certain issues around looking at some of these issues called peer review mechanism.
Yeah, mechanism.
And I think it's time to now begin to look at whether that is really working or not, because we still have just in our backyard, Paul Biya is still in office as Cameroon president till now. You have in Gabon, you have some other country, Equatorial Guinea, which is just across the water from us. And you have people who have been in power who are not allowing democratic transition, in their country. So we have taught, many people are taught the peer review mechanism, of the whole AU, championed largely by President Obasanjo would help, to reduce or eliminate this problem. But so far, that has failed.
Is the wrong man to do it?
maybe that's why. But so far, it has failed. We've not seen the peer review mechanism, halting leaders from staying in office for a long time or wanting to be lifetime president or wanting to elongate their tenure beyond the constitutional stipulated time. So we need to go back and look at what to do as a continent or as a region in ECOWAS. How do we ensure that people can have a say in who rules them and ensure that there are genuine political transition rather than make up, transition like what you have in Cameroon.
All right. We have to leave it here now. Thank you so much for your insight, Biodun Sowunmi. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Right.